Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Imagine you're born into poverty in rural China, live through the upheaval of the Cultural Revolution, and somehow end up founding a company that challenges the world's biggest superpowers.
Wow.
Sounds like a movie, right?
Yeah, it does.
But that's the real-life story of Ren Zhengfei and Huawei, laid out in House of Huawei by Eva Du. We're going deep on this one, folks. If you're enjoying these dives into complex topics, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with a friend who loves a good story.
That's right.
This book is so much more than a typical business bio. It's about ambition, resilience, and how a company's fate can get tangled up with global power dynamics.
What's fascinating to me is that Du doesn't just tell Ren's story. She really sets the stage by weaving in China's history and political landscape. You start to understand how deeply intertwined Huawei's success is with China's own ambitions on the world stage.
Okay, let's start with Ren's early years. Born in 1944, he grows up in a family
Yeah.
with 7 kids, facing incredible hardship, especially during the Cultural Revolution.
His father, a dedicated educator, is persecuted during that time, even forced to teach in a labor camp.
Wow.
Du really brings to life the impact this had on Ren, shaping his work ethic and his sense of purpose. It's this unwavering commitment that would later influence Huawei's demanding wolf culture.
You know, reading about his childhood,
Yeah.
it's almost hard to believe he became a tech giant.
Right.
I mean, he was fascinated by technology.
Yeah.
But his first real exposure to it was a simple lecture about computers.
That's right. It's a reminder that even seemingly insignificant events can be turning points. This lecture sparks something in Ren, setting him on a path that would eventually lead to the creation of Huawei.
And his path takes him through the military, right?
Yeah.
Serving as an engineer in the People's Liberation Army must have had a huge impact on him.
Absolutely. This is where he hones his technical skills, but more importantly, develops a deep understanding of discipline and strategic thinking. Du argues that these military experiences become the foundation of Huawei's later success, shaping their organizational structure and relentless pursuit of goals.
Okay, so let's talk about Huawei's early days. Founded in 1987 in Shenzhen, which at the time was rapidly becoming a hub for entrepreneurship. They started out as a pretty humble telephone switch venture.
Shenzhen was the perfect place for a company like Huawei to emerge. It was a hotbed of innovation, a testing ground for China's economic reforms.
But even in this environment, it wasn't all smooth sailing. They faced constant struggles, securing funding, overcoming technological hurdles, competing against established players.
Jinda doesn't sugarcoat the challenges they faced. She describes early difficulties in securing loans, the constant need to adapt their technology to the evolving market, and the fierce competition from both domestic and international rivals.
So how do they manage to push through all of that? I mean, they go from this small startup to becoming a global powerhouse.
It's a combination of factors, but Du highlights 2 key elements: Ren's leadership and Huawei's wolf culture.
We have to dig into that wolf culture more. From what I've read, it's this intense work ethic, a culture where employees are expected to go above and beyond, to be relentless in their pursuit of success.
It's fascinating how this wolf culture, which is deeply rooted in Ren's military background, becomes both a driving force behind their rapid growth and a source of controversy. Some see it as a key to their success, while others criticize it as being excessively demanding and potentially leading to burnout.
It's a great point. It seems like this wolf culture is something you can't ignore when analyzing Huawei's story. But it wasn't just Ren driving everything. Du introduces some other key players in these early days, like Sun Yafan, the sales chief, with a mysterious past.
Sun Yafang is a fascinating character. She's known for her sharp business acumen and her ability to navigate China's complex political landscape, securing crucial partnerships and contracts for Huawei. Du even hints at her potential background in intelligence, which adds another layer of intrigue to the story.
And then there's Li Yinan, the boy genius, who joins right out of university and quickly rises through the ranks. He's a pivotal figure in developing those early technologies.
His story highlights the importance of attracting and nurturing young talent. Especially in the fast-paced world of tech, Li Yinan represents that next generation of innovators, pushing Huawei forward.
It seems like every step of the way. Huawei's success is tied to navigating China's political landscape. I mean, talk about a high wire act. How did they manage to thrive in such a complex environment?
It's a delicate balancing act, and Du really unpacks it well. Huawei benefits from government support, including early contracts and access to funding, but they also have to maintain a degree of independence to avoid becoming a state-controlled enterprise,
Right.
which could have stifled their growth.
That makes sense. So how does Ren walk that tightrope?
Deuce suggests that his deep understanding of China's political system was key. Remember, he comes from a military background, so he has these insights into how power works. He cultivates relationships with key officials, learns to navigate government policies and regulations. It's a combination of political savvy and a bit of luck.
This makes the book's title, House of Huawei, even more interesting. It's not just about the company itself, but how it's built within the larger structure of China's political landscape.
Exactly. It benefits from its position
Yeah.
within that structure, but it's also constrained by it. Deuce shows how historical events like the Tiananmen Square protests had a huge impact on Huawei.
That must have been a difficult time for any company operating in China, especially one with close ties to the government.
Absolutely. The crackdown on the protests created a climate of political uncertainty and led to international scrutiny of China's human rights record. Huawei was inevitably caught in the crossfire.
So how did Ren steer them through that?
Due portrays him as a pragmatist. He recognizes that maintaining a good relationship with the government is crucial, but at the same time, he's laser-focused on building a globally competitive business. It was a tightrope walk, for sure.
Speaking of global ambitions,
Yeah.
let's talk about Huawei's expansion. Beyond China, it all starts in the mid-1990s, right? Where do they go first?
Initially, they target emerging markets, specifically Russia and Southeast Asia. These are regions where Western telecom giants don't have as strong a foothold, giving Huawei an opening to establish themselves.
I've read that their approach was incredibly aggressive. They were undercutting competitors with lower prices, offering attractive financing options, basically doing whatever it took to secure deals.
It was a bold strategy, and it works. They rapidly gain market share, challenging the established players. But Due points out that it wasn't just about price. Huawei also focused on building strong relationships with their clients, going above and beyond to meet their needs. They understood that building trust was crucial for long-term success.
It's starting to feel like a classic David versus Goliath story, with Huawei taking on the industry giants.
There are definitely parallels, but remember, they weren't just competing on price. They were investing heavily in research and development, creating innovative technologies. It was a long game, and they were playing to win.
That makes sense. So while they're offering competitive prices, they're also laying the groundwork to become a technological leader.
Exactly. And that commitment to R&D allowed them to eventually compete head-to-head with those industry giants, not just on price, but on technological sophistication.
But as they expand globally, they also start facing more scrutiny.
Right.
Especially about security concerns and those ties to the Chinese government.
This becomes a major hurdle for Huawei. As their global presence grows, so does the suspicion from Western governments, particularly the United States. Dugo explores how this distrust escalates, fueled by allegations of intellectual property theft, potential security risks posed by their equipment, and those perceived close ties to the Chinese government.
And these concerns had a real impact on Huawei's business. Weren't they essentially blocked from operating in certain markets because of this?
Yes, absolutely. The book details setbacks they face in several key markets, including the U.S., where they're effectively blocked from major contracts due to these security concerns.
It's fascinating how this one company's story becomes so entangled with geopolitics. It's about ambition, innovation, and resilience. But it's also about navigating this complex web of international relations and facing down deep-seated mistrust.
And Due does a fantastic job of presenting these different threads without taking sides. She lays out the facts and the different perspectives and allows the reader to draw their own conclusions.
Before we move on to Huawei's later years and the controversies surrounding Meng Wanzhou, let's dive into their technological achievements. I mean, they made huge strides in areas like 5G technology, right?
Absolutely. Huawei emerged as a global leader in 5G development, investing heavily in research and development. Their chip design subsidiary, Silicon, was a key part of this strategy.
I was really interested in that part. They were aiming to become self-sufficient in terms of those core components of their technology, which is a pretty bold move.
It was a long-term vision, and it reflects their desire to control their own destiny in a world where technological dominance is increasingly important. Silicon allowed them to reduce their reliance on foreign suppliers, especially in a time when those supply chains were becoming more and more vulnerable.
They were also recruiting top talent from around the world, setting up research labs and offices in major tech hubs. It's like they were pulling out all the stops to be at the forefront of innovation.
That global recruitment strategy speaks volumes about their commitment to technological advancement. They understood that to compete on a global scale, they needed access to the best minds in the industry, regardless of where they came from.
So we have this picture of Huawei as a rising tech giant,
Mm.
pushing the boundaries of innovation. But then there's the other side of their story, the one that raises ethical concerns. The dude doesn't shy away from exploring Huawei's involvement in developing and supplying surveillance technologies.
This is where things get complicated. Their role in building the safe city systems in China, which use facial recognition and other advanced technologies to monitor citizens, has been widely criticized by human rights groups.
It's hard to read about things like the Uyghur alarm feature in their facial recognition system without feeling deeply troubled. To think that their technology could be used to target and repress ethnic minorities is a serious issue.
It raises important questions about the responsibility of tech companies operating in countries with authoritarian regimes. To what extent are they complicit in the misuse of their technology? It's an ethical dilemma with no easy answers.
It seems like Huawei is caught between their ambition to be a global tech leader and their deep ties to a government that's using their technology in ways that many consider morally reprehensible.
That tension, that contradiction is at the heart of their story, and it's what makes their journey both fascinating and unsettling.
A lot to take in, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
We've covered a lot of ground, from Ren's challenging childhood to the rise of Huawei as a tech giant, their global expansion, and those controversies surrounding their involvement in surveillance technologies. But there's more to come. In part 2, we'll delve deeper into the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, Ren Zhengfei's daughter, and Huawei CFO, and explore the geopolitical chess game that erupts in the wake of her detention. Welcome back to our deep dive into House of Huawei.
You'll recall that we left off discussing Huawei's global expansion and the increasing scrutiny they were facing, particularly from the United States.
And then boom, in December 2018, Meng Wanzhou, Huawei's CFO and Ren Zhengfei's daughter, is arrested in Canada at the request of the U.S.
Talk about a turning point in this story.
It wasn't just a turning point. For Huawei, it became a major event in the U.S.-China relationship. Meng's arrest sent shockwaves through the tech world and ignited a geopolitical firestorm that we're still feeling the effects of today.
What I found really impressive is how Dee walks us through the complexities of the case without getting lost in the weeds. So it'd be easy to get bogged down in the legal details. But she keeps the narrative moving, focusing on both the political maneuvering and the human impact of it all.
She does a brilliant job of balancing those two sides. You see the high-stakes legal battle playing out, with the U.S. accusing Meng of bank fraud, alleging she misled HSBC about Huawei's business dealings in Iran, violating U.S. sanctions. But you also get these glimpses into Meng's life under house arrest, the toll it takes on her family, and her determination to fight the charges.
You can't help but feel for her in those moments. She's this powerful executive suddenly thrust into this legal nightmare.
Right, and at the same time, she becomes a symbol of China's defiance against U.S. pressure.
It's a powerful reminder that behind these geopolitical struggles are real people whose lives are being deeply affected.
And then there's Ren Zhengfei himself, stepping into the spotlight to defend his daughter, granting interviews, something he had rarely done before.
He's always been known as this intensely private person. So to see him putting himself out there like that really speaks to the gravity of the situation. It feels like he saw this as an attack on Huawei itself and on China's ambitions to become a technological leader.
That's a key insight Du brings out. It's not just about Meng Wanzhou. It's about the larger battle for technological dominance between the U.S. and China. And Huawei is caught right in the middle.
Okay, so let's step back for a second and talk about why Huawei was doing business in Iran in the first place. What was the context of that?
To understand that, you have to look at the broader context of U.S. sanctions against Iran, imposed over concerns about their nuclear program and their alleged support for terrorism. The U.S. government basically viewed any company doing business with Iran as potentially undermining those sanctions and aiding a hostile regime.
So Huawei gets caught in the crossfire of this U.S. policy towards Iran. It sounds like they're trying to walk this a really fine line, balancing their business interests with the political realities of operating in a world dominated by U.S. power.
That's exactly the challenge they face. They see Iran as a lucrative market for their telecommunications equipment. But they're also aware of the risks involved in violating U.S. sanctions.
But it seems like they tried to have it both ways. Du talks about how they use shell companies, like Skycom, to obscure their dealings in Iran,
Yes.
especially after the U.S. tightened those sanctions in 2011.
This is where the allegations of deception come in. U.S. authorities claim that Huawei deliberately misled banks about their relationship with Skycom and the nature of their business activities in Iran. They argue that this was a deliberate attempt to evade sanctions and continue profiting from the Iranian market.
And this is what ultimately leads to Meng's arrest. The U.S. sees her as the key figure in this alleged scheme to evade sanctions.
That's the crux of the U.S. case. They focus on presentations Meng made to HSBC executives, arguing that she knowingly misrepresented Huawei's relationship with Skycom, putting the bank at risk of violating U.S. sanctions.
It's like a corporate thriller, this whole thing. High finance, international intrigue, and a family caught in the middle of a global power struggle.
It's a captivating story, and Du keeps you on the edge of your seat. As she unpacks it all, she takes you behind the scenes of this complex legal battle, explaining the intricacies of sanctions law, the strategies employed by both sides, and the high stakes involved for everyone.
And then there's the whole issue of espionage, which adds another layer of complexity. Du reveals how U.S. intelligence agencies, specifically the NSA, have been targeting Huawei for years, suspecting them of using their technology to spy for the Chinese government.
This adds a whole other dimension to the story. The U.S. sees Huawei not just as a company violating sanctions, but as a national security threat. They're concerned about the potential for Huawei's equipment to be used for intercepting communications or disrupting critical infrastructure.
And these suspicions were already circulating before Meng's arrest.
Right. Yes, they had been building for years. The book details incidents that fueled those suspicions, like the allegations about Huawei supplying telecommunications equipment to the Taliban in Afghanistan in the early 2000s, and their involvement in building internet infrastructure in sensitive regions like Xinjiang, where China has been accused of human rights abuses.
It's starting to feel like the U.S. government was looking for a way to contain Huawei's growth, seeing them as a potential threat to their technological dominance.
That's certainly a plausible interpretation. The U.S. was already concerned about China's rising economic and technological power, and Huawei became a focal point for those anxieties, especially with their advancements in 5G technology.
So Meng's arrest becomes much more than just sanctions violations. It becomes this symbolic clash between two superpowers vying for technological supremacy.
Exactly. It's a proxy war playing out in the realm of technology and international law, and it's fascinating to see how both sides use this case to advance their own strategic interests.
And how does China react to all of this? I mean, I can't imagine they just sat back and watched as one of their top executives was arrested and potentially extradited to the U.S.
As you can imagine, the Chinese government was furious. They denounced Meng's arrest as a politically motivated attack, accusing the U.S. of trying to stifle China's technological rise and maintain their global dominance. And they saw this as an act of aggression, an attempt to cripple a leading Chinese company and prevent China from becoming a leader in the global tech landscape.
So it becomes this tit-for-tat escalation. The U.S. arrests Meng. China retaliates. Du describes how Chinese state media goes into overdrive, portraying Meng as a victim of Western imperialism and rallying public support behind Huawei.
It's interesting how this incident galvanizes nationalistic sentiment in China. Huawei, once seen as just another successful tech company, is now cast as a symbol of China's strength and resilience in the face of what they perceive as Western bullying.
It feels like Meng's arrest becomes a turning point in U.S.-China relations, marking this downward spiral into deeper mistrust and hostility.
That's a key takeaway from this part of the book. What started as a legal case involving one company escalates into this broader geopolitical conflict with global implications, and it's a conflict that continues to play out today.
And then, just to make things even more complicated, shortly after Meng's arrest, two Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, are detained in China on charges of espionage.
The timing of those arrests was incredibly suspicious. Many saw it as clear retaliation for Meng's detention. It became known as the Two Michaels case, and it added a whole new layer of tension to the already strained relationship between Canada and China.
It's heartbreaking to read about what those two men went through. Du reveals how their lives were completely upended.
Held in Chinese prisons for over 1,000 days. What was widely seen as hostage diplomacy, their detention really highlighted the human cost of these geopolitical disputes. It showed how individuals can get caught in the crossfire and become pawns in a larger game they have no control over.
It also raises serious concerns about China's willingness to flout international norms and use strong-arm tactics to pressure other countries.
It's a chilling example of how individual freedoms can become bargaining chips in these international power struggles. It forces you to think about the limits of diplomacy and the rule of law in a world where countries are increasingly willing to take extreme measures to achieve their goals.
So, we've got Meng Wanzhou under house arrest in Vancouver, the two Michaels detained in China, and the U.S. and China locked in this escalating trade war with Huawei at the center of it all. Where do we go from here? How does this tangled web unravel?
That's a great question, and it's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at the resolution of Meng's case, the fate of the two Michaels, and what this whole saga means for Huawei's future in a world increasingly defined by technological competition and geopolitical rivalries.
Welcome back, everyone. I don't know about you, but I'm really eager to see how this whole Huawei saga unfolds. When we left off, Meng Wanzhou was under house arrest. The two Michaels were detained in China, and the U.S.-China relationship was about as tense as it could get. Where do things go from there?
Well, after years of legal battles and diplomatic back and forth, there's finally movement in September 2021. Meng Wanzhou strikes a deal with the U.S. Justice Department.
What does that deal look like? Does she admit any wrongdoing?
It's a carefully crafted agreement, allowing both sides to save face. Meng agrees to a deferred prosecution agreement, acknowledging that some of her statements about Huawei's business in Iran were misleading. But she stopped short of pleading guilty to the charges against her. It's a compromise, for sure.
And what about the two Michaels? Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Are they released as part of this deal?
Almost simultaneously with Meng's release, the two Michaels are allowed to return to Canada.
The timing seems a little too convenient to be a coincidence, don't you think?
It's hard to see it as anything other than a coordinated effort. Though both the Chinese and Canadian governments deny any quid pro quo, it's clear that their detention was directly linked to Meng's case.
It's a relief that they were finally freed, but it's also a stark reminder of how individual lives can get caught up in these geopolitical power struggles.
Their ordeal is a sobering illustration of the human cost of these international disputes. It raises questions about what we're willing to sacrifice in the name of national interests.
So Meng returns to China,
Yeah.
hailed as a national hero, and the two Michaels are back in Canada trying to rebuild their lives
Yeah.
after years of wrongful imprisonment. But what about Huawei? How did this whole ordeal impact the company?
Even with Meng's release, the U.S. continues its campaign against Huawei. The Trump administration imposes sanctions that restrict Huawei's access to crucial U.S. technologies, like chips and software.
Those sanctions must have been a major blow.
They were devastating. Du describes how these sanctions crippled Huawei's smartphone business. They were cut off from suppliers like Google's Android operating system, a critical component for any smartphone maker looking to compete globally.
So were Huawei's global ambitions essentially crushed?
They certainly faced major setbacks, but it's important to remember that Huawei is a resilient company. They've been adapting to these challenges, shifting their focus to other areas of their business, like telecommunications infrastructure and cloud computing.
It sounds like they're trying to find ways to pivot and survive in a world where they're increasingly being shut out by the U.S.
Exactly, and they're investing heavily in research and development, trying to achieve greater self-sufficiency when it comes to chips and other essential technologies. They're trying to build a de-Americanized supply chain, but it's an uphill battle. The U.S. still has a significant lead in many of these key areas.
It seems like the U.S. government is determined to contain Huawei's rise, seeing them as a legitimate threat to their technological dominance.
The U.S. sees this as a strategic competition with huge implications for the future, not just a trade dispute. They're concerned about the potential for Huawei's technology, particularly in 5G, to give China an edge that could have military and economic consequences down the line.
It feels like we're witnessing a kind of technological Cold War playing out, with Huawei caught right in the middle of it.
That's a great analogy, and it's a conflict that goes far beyond Huawei. It's reshaping the global tech landscape, forcing countries to pick sides and consider the potential risks and benefits of aligning with one side or the other.
It's a complex story, and Du does a phenomenal job of capturing the many layers of it. It's about ambition, innovation, and resilience, but it's also about political maneuvering, ethical dilemmas, and the unintended consequences of global power struggles.
What stands out to me is how Du manages to weave together these different threads, the personal, the political, the technological, into this compelling narrative that leaves you thinking long after you finish the book.
It's a story that's still unfolding, and its implications will continue to shape the world for years to come. House of Huawei is a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the forces
Yeah,
shaping the 21st century.
I completely agree. It's a fascinating look at how technology, politics, and economics are becoming increasingly intertwined and how those connections are reshaping the global landscape.
This has been a deep dive indeed. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the fascinating and complex world of Huawei.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you.
And to all of you listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you most in this story? Share your favorite moment in the comments below. Until next time.